Hello everyone. Here we are, Asha and Keshava. We'll start with a prayer, some wonderful chanting, and then we'll go into our book about Swamiji's letters. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with deep understanding, that we may know in every part of our heart, mind, and spirit that we are your children, profoundly loved for who we are, understood, guided, blessed. Help us to stay in tune with your inward presence, that we may move through this world with calm confidence, radiating your loving presence to all. Om. Peace. Amen.
Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, and day. I look for thee night and day, night and day, night and day. I look for thee night and day, night and day, night and day. I look for thee night and day. My Lord, I will be thine always. My Lord, I will be thine always. I may go far, farther than the stars. I may go far, farther than the stars, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. Devotees may come, devotees may go, devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. When I die, look into mine eyes. When I die, look into mine eyes. They will mutely say, I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. I may go far, farther than the stars. I may go far, farther than the stars, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. Devotees may come, devotees may go, devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. When I die, look into mine eyes. When I die, look into mine eyes. They will mutely say, I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. I may go far, farther than the stars. I may go far, farther than the stars, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. Devotees may come, devotees may go, devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always, my Lord, I will be thine always. When I die, look into mine eyes. When I die, they will mutely say, I will be thine always, my Lord. I will be thine always, my Lord. I will be thine always.
We'll spend a few minutes now in silent meditation. Om, peace. Amen. Thank you. So, we are making our way through Divine Friendship, and we are still in the section called Strong Medicine, and we're going to be here probably all tonight, and maybe one more, but we just have a couple more pages. Not that every section isn't good, but some of these are kind of more painful than others. So here where we are. Okay, what this was about. This was written in 9th of 2000. It said about a certain Ananda meditation group leader. Let me give you a context for this one. This is actually written, the meditation group leader in question was in a country in Europe. Just one of the many countries that is served through Ananda Assisi. And this letter was written to the person at Ananda Assisi who was in charge of helping to guide and inspire this particular meditation group. And the person who had been leading this group had written a strong letter saying that he had been informed that Master had changed Kriya and had diluted Kriya. And he had found this other teacher, and the teacher was teaching him the true Kriya. And he wrote that he was having much better results from the true Kriya, and that Yogananda's Kriya was not really valid by comparison. And in the context, and I believe I have this accurate, this teacher had come from India and was making certain claims about his legitimacy in regard to Master's teachings. And he was taking a lot of people who had been following Master through Ananda, especially in certain countries, in certain places. There was a lot of defection from Ananda to this teacher because he was more authentic and his Kriya was more authentic. So Swamiji is not writing to the European. He's writing to the person, to our person, not writing to the European group leader, because he'd been in charge of our Ananda group, and he was the leader of the group, and now he was making all these pronouncements about how he himself had now gotten the true teaching, and so naturally he was going to begin either to split the group, destroy it, or take it toward this other teacher. And so the person, the woman who was coordinating the group in several countries in Europe, several groups in Europe, gave to Swamiji the letter from this group leader and said basically, what should I do? And so Swami's writing to that person, to that woman, about the group leader. So he starts right in about the group leader in the European country. I'm not mentioning the name because it would be too easily identified, the country I mean. So Swami just starts right in. There's no preamble necessary. Let me begin with his statements, meaning the European group leader, with his statements about the results he claims to have received from that other Kriya. He claims, first, that the other Kriya works better than the one we've received from Master and teach others. And second, that Master diluted this technique for American consumption. This is also because the group leader is not American. So he's feeling that, it was diluted for Americans, but it doesn't have to be diluted for me or for my people. So that was also part of it. So Swami writes, number 1, does his Kriya work better? Swami says, I have given Kriya initiation now for 51 years in America, Europe, and India, and to countless thousands of people. Not once have I heard from anyone that some other Kriya works better than Master's. Master told me himself that he was grooming me to take his message out to the world and, as he himself put it, to do a great work. He surely would have let me know if what I'd received from him was only a dilution of the real Kriya technique. So this is one of those instances where Swami just has to claim that I have a direct line to Master. He's not writing this letter to the meditation group leader. This is a very important point. He's writing it to someone whose friendship and loyalty has been in place for decades, and Swami doesn't have to mince words in the letter he's writing. So bear in mind, this is not necessarily how Swami would write to the group leader. I'm not sure that Swami ever did write to the group leader. He let it just be handled by someone else, because Swami himself had never received a letter from that man. So when Swami just says, look, I've given Kriya all over the place, I know this, Master told me what it was supposed to do, he would have told me if it was only half of the teaching. And Swami, again, doesn't have to mince words. You see how his tone is very different depending on who he's writing to, because he's talking peer to peer, essentially, to the woman who was in charge. The second point, people's imagination can do many things, especially if their minds are arrogant and prone to exalt their own position in the eyes of God. Well, he's talking a little bit about this man, and that was precisely his attitude. If their minds are made up and they are, I love the way Swami's language, and prone to exalt their own position in the eyes of God. It's such an understatement, but it's just so perfect. And this man's statement that he, and Swami puts parenthetically, and many others, receive more from the new Kriya he has received is certainly an example of arrogance inflated by the power of imagination. That comment parenthetically, and many others, Swamiji had told me a number of times in the context of leadership, of experiences at Ananda, and I've always noticed it's true. When someone wants to prove a point against you, they'll always tell you that many others agree with them. And they'll often tell you that many others agree with them, but they're afraid to speak to you like I am. And it's surprisingly how consistently a person will come forward and tell you that many others agree, and how often when you try to trace that down, that it turns out to be, his mother, his sister, and maybe his cat. It's just not like the phrase many others is sort of a word that people throw in when they're trying to prove their point. Now, I don't mean to be rude about this. Swami's being pretty rude here. But the reason he put it, and many others, is because it is something that Swami warned us about as leaders. And I must say I've watched it consistently. When somebody is turning negative and wants to prove that they're right, they'll tell you that they're really just one of many. So that's why he put it there. Is certainly an example of arrogance inflated by the power of imagination. Now, this is how he wrote. It was the tone of his letter and the entire tone of his letter that caused Swami to be so condemning, so critical. And then Swami adds that, I do not say he is misguided, for the only test we have of the value of Kriya is whether or not it actually works. This test must also be applied, however, to the persons themselves who practice them. If it has made them less humble rather than more so, less charitable and not more so, less magnetic Instead of more so, we must assume from the evidence that they are fooling themselves. So this is exactly the test that Jesus said when he was asked, how can you tell a false prophet from a true one? And Jesus' answer was, by their fruits you shall know them. Because Swami himself is saying here, I'm not saying he's misguided, because this is his subjective opinion of how the Kriya works. But then Swami says, but you can look at it from the outside. Has he become more humble, more charitable, more magnetic? And of course, the answer to that is no. If he had, then you would think, well, he's really on to something good. And it's made him the opposite. It's made him more arrogant, more critical, more exalted in the eyes of God in his own opinion. And so that doesn't make you think, oh, he's really on to something better than I'm doing. And that's what Swami's saying here. We must assume from the evidence that they are fooling themselves. This is, in fact, a common enough mistake on the spiritual path, to fool yourself. That's what he's talking about. Therefore, it was, incidentally, that Patanjali proposed a number of objective tests for the validity of subjective spiritual experience. So when you go through Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he says the perfection of this practice creates this result. The perfection of this practice creates this result. And even though the perfection and the result, you might not be perfect in it, but it's directional. You can see where it's going. And if you see, and because one of the things that Patanjali seriously warned us about is false visions. And false visions are not just seeing something, but a false vision of oneself. Just that I falsely comprehend what's happening. And this teacher who came through was very persuasive and sucked a lot of people into him, some of whom came back to Ananda because after a time they realized that the promise that he was offering was not fulfilled. But sometimes, and it depends, and I really know nothing about that teacher, but sometimes, well, two things happen sometimes that draw people away. One is a new teacher will flatter you. I recognized you immediately as I came into the room. I know that you're one of mine from past lives. Swamiji never flattered people. He never sort of made people feel in an exaggerated way that they were uniquely spiritual. He encouraged people. He was very supportive. He was very optimistic and full of hope for all of our potential. But he never tried to win people by flattering them. He would call us all great souls, but he called everybody a great soul. So sometime a teacher, and whether misguided or otherwise, will feed someone a sense of greater importance than they were receiving from Ananda. And sometimes that causes a shift. Another experience that I've seen happen repeatedly, Swamiji especially, and seemingly it was true of Master also, Swami commented how around Sri Ramakrishna, who was an avatar, and Master was an avatar, they were of the same stature, many miraculous things happened to people. Sri Ramakrishna was in India in the late 1800s, so it was a different reality, but a lot of people had a lot of spiritual experiences and different miraculous things, not just miracles, but things happening around Ramakrishna. Swami said that happened very, very rarely around Master. He just didn't give people a lot of paranormal events. A few people had them, but visions and remarkable experiences were not common. It just, perhaps it's our practice, perhaps it's the way Master really felt was better to do it. So what I have seen, and this is over decades, sometimes someone will meet another teacher, or in the early years, Swami used to invite a lot of teachers to Ananda, but he found that too often they drew people away, and that it wasn't helpful for the people who were drawn away. But they would have experiences, and they would have experiences perhaps that they'd never had with Swami, and it would make them feel persuaded that whoever had been present when those experiences happened was a better teacher, or more important, or belonged to me. They didn't know what to do with those. Now, I'm going to tell you an experience I had because this was very interesting. This was a Swami from India who came to visit Ananda a couple of times. Swami Kriyananda liked him, and he came once when Swami wasn't present. This among this experience and a couple of others, after that, Swami never invited a teacher to come to the ashram unless Swami was also present. So this teacher was there, and we all really enjoyed him. He was a Himalayan yogi. He was loads of fun, really exotic and interesting, and had a lot to say that was marvelous. And at one point, he was performing at what was called the Whole Earth Fair, I think it was called, at the University of California at Davis. It was the beginning of Earth Day. This was way back in the 70s. And this Indian teacher was speaking, and we were a kirtan group, and the Ananda Kirtan group went to support him. Swami Kriyananda was out of the country. And I remember sitting down as part of that kirtan group, and I remember like 45 minutes later, I really didn't know where I'd been or where the time had gone. I mean, there was a lot of power in that man. And then he came back to the community, or before, he was giving a satsang, and he starts talking about his life in the Himalayas. And he starts talking about where he lived and what he was doing and the sadhus that were there and the cave that he stayed in. And I was meditating, listening, and all of a sudden I could see it. And it wasn't that his description was vivid. I could see it. I was walking on the ground where he was walking. I was looking at the people that he was looking at. And you know, the first thing you think of is, wow, this is really interesting. But the second thing I realized was that man had invaded my mind. And I hadn't asked him to. I hadn't given him permission. I hadn't invited him. He had just projected his thought into my mind, and I did not appreciate that. I felt it was presumptuous, incredibly presumptuous, because I hadn't asked for it. And I just repudiated it, and immediately it stopped. But I realized, oh my gosh, you know, it's just like my particular temperament was such that I wasn't drawn into it, and I could sense that there was something not quite right about it. And so these things happen. I tell that story. It's not that everyone who ever left Ananda for another teacher made the wrong decision. That would be incredibly presumptuous of me to say. But unfortunately, it didn't always work out better. And so in this particular case of this particular man who came through, it did not work out better. So he's talking, I have never met anyone else who claimed that the teacher he speaks of guided them more correctly than Master. And by that point, this man was making a big wave, and so we'd heard from a lot. I have never met anyone else who claimed that the teacher he speaks of guided them more correctly than Master. I have not seen actual examples of spiritual radiance in the eyes of those who followed those teachings. In my 51 years of teaching, this man is the first person I know of to say that he's on to something better than Master's Kriya. His premise seems to be founded on sand. So when Swami knew he had someone who was listening to him, he didn't hesitate to speak, and this letter was written to someone who's listening to him. Now Swami asked questions, and these questions may not be going around now, but they certainly went around for a number of years. Did Master dilute Lahiri Mahashaya's and Babaji's Kriya technique? Did he teach Kriya differently in India from the way he taught it in America? I mean, every so often that thought would come. People would say, because they were through different lineages, or somebody had told them, or they'd read something. Swami says, no. I state this denial as an unequivocal fact. I took advantage of several opportunities of this. Now Swami's talking about when he was in India from 1958 to 1962. That's what he's referring to. I took advantage of several opportunities to check out the differences that have been claimed between Master's Kriya and that of other lines from Lahiri Mahashaya, because Swami was there in India at a time when many direct disciples were still around, and he could actually converse with them about the Kriya and learn about it, because Swamiji was unafraid of the truth. And this statement was, I would say it would periodically surface, that Master felt he was unable to teach the whole Kriya in America. Americans weren't capable for various reasons, and so he taught a different technique. Swami felt, I have to clear my throat. Swami felt that he had an obligation to know the truth. And if it was true, he wanted to know what to do about it. He didn't want to just hide from the fact because it would be inconvenient and unpleasant. He was never afraid. So I took advantage of several opportunities to check out the differences that had been claimed between Master's Kriya and that of other of the Lahiri Mahashayas. Swami says, some differences do exist, but they are superficial. All of the actual differences convinced me only that Master was bringing people into Kriya more gradually. He brought them to the full technique, however, as they showed themselves ready for it. I'm not sure precisely what he's expressing, except for those of you who've had Kriya initiation, there's an extra mudra, there's an extra concentration on the chakras, a few things that you add in, that when we give the first initiation, we say, do it this way, and then we also say, but over time you can begin to do it this way. And I believe that's what Swami was referring to, and nothing more than that, meaning that the first initiation doesn't include everything, but then you can learn it later. Kachari Mudra being one of the most important things. I believe it's possible that Lahiri brought Kachari in right away, and Master didn't, because it was just too odd and too unknown. It involves turning the tongue back, and it's exceedingly difficult to do if you're not practiced in it. So those were the differences. So as Swami said, the differences were superficial, and it was Master's way of bringing people in step by step. He wasn't hiding it, and he didn't change it. He just presented it more gradually. This man claims that, quote, many people have received better results from what they have learned from this other teacher. Do you believe it? I don't. For one thing, I have seen nothing in this man or in the others to convince me that they are soaring spiritually. Swami just believes his own intuition on these things and his own perception. I should make clear, however, that I've no interest in persuading them to change their practices. He makes an exclamation point besides that. He's writing directly to the woman who's in charge of coordinating them. He's not writing to those people. Again, it's very important to keep it separate. But when Swami would work with us, he would want us to clearly understand what the situation was. There were two issues. What is really happening? What do we perceive? What's the truth of the matter? And then, what shall we do about it? And even when we decide what shall we do about it, what shall we communicate? How shall we present it? So oftentimes, Swami would have a very strong and unequivocal point of view that he freely shared with us. But then when he was dealing with the person directly or the situation directly, his thought was not, how sternly and strongly and unequivocally can I declare what I know. His thought was what will be helpful and even what will be appropriate. Because, sometimes a firm, strong stand, we're talking about strong medicine here, is appropriate, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time you have to just give people what they're asking from you. And that, you'll find that in the letter after this one. That's also part of it. I should make clear, however, that I've no interest in persuading them to change their practices. Master always said that the proof of Kriya lies in its results. If this man and others think they get more results in following this other way, I don't think we should allow our discussion of the matter to descend to the level of dogma. For us to say, no, our way is better, and they say, no, our way is better. What a ridiculous conversation. If they think it's better, let them have it. We have nothing. We know they won't be damned to hell, so we don't have to save their souls. And we don't have to fight for people to stay with Ananda. I mean, the power of Ananda is that it benefits you. And if it doesn't, then by all means, go find some place that does. So he's not trying to persuade, he's just trying to make it clear to the woman. Let them go their way. In taking initiation elsewhere, they have already separated themselves from our line of gurus and are less likely to receive their blessings. I think I've talked about this in the context of other letters. When you go to another guru and take initiation there, you can't keep running them all simultaneously, especially in a gesture like this where I'm repudiating this as false and taking this as more true. It's also another reason why Swami's going to make no effort to persuade and advises this woman not to do it either, is they've told us they don't want our input. They're following another path. We have no position whatsoever to speak. However, and this is where he goes, I think they should be given a chance to express themselves on this point, for possibly, and now he's talking about the whole group, for possibly only this man, and one or two others feel as he has expressed himself. Many others is a very convenient phrase. Let anyone who desires another path go with the spiritual way he chooses. That is everyone's privilege. However, not all of them, meaning all of those who are in the Ananda group, are in agreement with this man, then they should have the freedom to tell us so, and not allow him to dictate their future. Because this man has been running the group, and now he and some others at least have gone and taken initiation from another place, so he's wanting to turn the whole group toward that just turn this Ananda group into that group. Swami says we can't allow him to do that without finding out if that's what everyone wants. See, this is where it gets complicated, because you have these groups at a distance and you have individuals, especially individuals who, to use Swami's charming phrase, tend to exalt themselves in the eyes of God. And often these leaders at a distance will gradually assume the role of the spiritually informed one guiding the others. Maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. But then if that man who has become perceived as the spiritual authority in the group turns in another direction, you see it can be very confusing for everyone, because that's their main contact. So Swami is saying we owe it to the whole group to really be able to maintain a relationship with those who want to have a relationship with us. And we owe it to them not to just allow this man to speak for everyone when we really don't know. We can all remain friends, he says. It doesn't matter to us where their loyalties lie, so long as they are loyal first of all to God. But it is inappropriate for us to continue giving them energy if this energy is neither understood nor properly received. Because the question was, does this woman continue to visit that country? Does she continue to speak for the group? Does she, stay in touch with them? Do we provide services for them when they come to Ananda Sisi? Swami says, no, not if they don't want what we have. If they're just going to take our energy and then use it for something else, we don't have to be negative about it, but they've taken another path. They're with another guru. And so it's not, we can remain friends. You see, we can remain friends, we can wish them well, but we have a particular work to do, and we can't really support the whole world. So when someone walks away from what we have to offer, friendship can remain, but we need to put our energy into those who want what we have. Otherwise, it's both inappropriate, and also we only have so much time, and we only have so much energy, and we should spend it on those who are seeking to drink from the fountain that we bring. So that's how the letter ends. And of course, the whole group there just disintegrated and reformed later, and the other teacher, I'm not really sure. I think some people left and then came back to Ananda because it just didn't prove to be what they'd hoped. A lot of things happen on the spiritual path. And this is why, we sing, I have made thee the pole star of my life. Devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always. Now, of course, Swami says, as long as they remain loyal to God. So I don't want to be presumptuous. Merely to change paths doesn't mean you're not still with God. But even the loyalty to one's own path, you have to be careful. You can't just be casual and imagine that no delusion will ever pass through. Because delusions are always passing through. And God is always trying to find out how strong we are in what we're doing. Master said it's a constant test of our faith and our own intuitive experience. And that's what we're always working with, and we're always trying to refine. Sometimes we make the right decisions, meaning that our spiritual path continues strong and steady. Sometimes we make detours while we figure things out. And then we have to find our way back, either in this life or another one. Now this next letter is also just really, this was a very tough situation. To a devotee in Australia not invited to an Ananda colony leaders meeting. March 28, 1999. During that period of time, there were 4 people. I think at one point there were 6, but there were 4 people sent from Ananda village to Australia to try to start a work in Australia. Let me just think about this for a minute. When Swamiji, back in the early 70s, when we were just this tiny little primitive colony out in the forest, I think this was back in 1971, I remember Swamiji talking about the growth of Ananda would be to build on we didn't follow this completely, but we would build on the West Coast, we would build on the East Coast, we would go to Europe, we would then go to Australia, and then we would go to India. And Swamiji thought that India would be more receptive to what Ananda had to offer if it was an international work rather than a coming straight from America work. So we have built some in Europe. We have built well in Europe. Of course, we've built well on the West Coast. We have some good energy on the East Coast, but we've never actually been able to build a community. Not so far. And during Swami's lifetime, we were never able to establish a community of the kind that we have in a few places on the West Coast. Europe, Italy especially, of course, has flourished. And Australia was an effort which never bore fruit. And then India just came up of its own. It was sufficient by that point. But this was when we were trying, and these 2 couples had been sent, and by that I mean they had the full support of Swamiji and Ananda. It was a collective decision by the whole of Ananda and by Swamiji to put energy behind starting work in Australia. So they went to Australia to do it. But after they'd been there a little while, a very independent streak began to come out of them. Maybe it was the influence of the land, because Australia's a little bit like that. And the woman of one of the couples, and just like the 4 of them, to varying degrees, all began to feel that they needed to get their direction from Master directly, and they would accept suggestions from Swami and Ananda, but they were going to make their own decisions. They were going to do it the way they felt to do it. And it wasn't negative, but it was decisive. It was, well, I understand that's what you suggest, Swami, and in one specific instance. I understand what you've suggested, Swami. I'll meditate on it and see what Master says. Which, of course, that sounds fine on a certain level, but it wasn't fine. In previous letters, in this section, we've talked about that, so I don't need to belabor the point. So basically, the 4 of them there sort of drew a line around themselves that didn't actually have Swami and Ananda inside of it in the way that all the rest of the leaders of Ananda colonies around the world did. So when Swamiji called, and this was in May of 1999, Swamiji called all the Ananda leaders in America, colony leaders, in America to Assisi, and we had like a 2-week meeting with him there in Assisi. And this was after the Bertolucci lawsuit had ended, and Swami had moved to Europe. He didn't come back to America for 2 years. He called all of us there, and it was a summons. It wasn't an invitation. And I talk about it in the Light Bearer book in the year 1999, and there's a picture of all of us, and it was an absolutely glorious experience. But the Australia leaders were specifically not invited. And when they heard about the meeting and they heard that they weren't invited, they were quite miffed about it. They really felt that they should have been included and they weren't. So Swami's writing directly to the man who was the primary leader there. I was glad to get your recent letter. I hope all keeps going better for you. Yes, we're having a colony leaders meeting here in Assisi in May. It isn't for center leaders, only for leaders of our colonies in America and in Italy. Yours isn't a colony work in Australia, so you wouldn't normally be invited at this time, meaning it hadn't grown to the colony meant community. It hadn't grown to the level of a community. It was really more of a center. In fact, it was. It was an Ananda center. It wasn't really an Ananda community. Colony is the word we used. So in that sense, Swamiji was putting what they were doing in a certain category of development. But he says more. It will be a meeting to discuss Ananda's future directions. I'd love to think of your work there as part of Ananda's present outreach. Why don't I? Basically, because you've said frankly you want to do it your way and not listen to my or our guidance unless it agrees with what you feel. So he says, why haven't I invited you? Because you've separated yourself. This is what happens a lot of the time in life, is that we make a certain decision, then people act as if we meant it. And then then we feel slighted or hurt because we didn't really think through our position. So what these 4 people thought they were doing, they thought they were being loyal to Master by not being loyal to Swami. They thought they were listening to Master by being independent of what Swami thought, and we dealt with that last week or last time. So I'm not going to go over it again, but Swami did not feel that way. And then Swami says, I've nothing against that attitude, but I've simply suggested to our leaders in America that given that attitude, they serve you in whatever terms you ask for, but not treat you as wanting our guidance. So that's, you see the difference. It's like they've said, they'll listen to us if they agree, and they're not really seeking to be guided from the sources that the rest of us are guided by. That we're all trying to work together to do this thing in a certain way, and we're sort of willing to collectively do that, but these 4 people have said, well, we'll hear what you have to say, but then we'll decide whether or not we agree. Swami says, I have nothing against that attitude, but it's the same as the letter before. We're not going to continue to pour energy into you when you're really not on the same wavelength. So, then Swami says, you've expressed hurt, anger, and resentment of what I and others have written you. I don't mind that you want to do things your way, which must mean, surely, that you want to go your own way. I've told our leaders in America to give you whatever energy you want, but not to impose their thoughts on you for the simple reason that you don't seem to want them. And that's why, if you tell us that you want to work with us, we'll gladly work with you. But if you tell us, as you have, that you don't want to do what we suggest, we'll respectfully give you whatever it is you do seem to want, but not more. That is your decision, not ours. Working with us, however, must mean with, not apart from what Ananda is doing. And that was sort of like, this is the way we do things at Ananda, but that group there was saying, well, this is how we're going to do them here. And a certain amount of creativity is appropriate when you're in another country trying to start a work. And Swamiji was more than sympathetic to that. He never thought that we should try to cookie cutter what we did in one place in another place, but we should try to work together to find out what would be right, instead of simply declaring we don't want what you have, we have our own ways, which is more or less what was going on. We've told you what we think would be best for you and for our work there, and you haven't accepted it. Our thought, therefore, is by no means to abandon or exclude you, but to let you tell us just what you do want from us. Inviting you to a colony leaders retreat, even if you had a colony there, wouldn't have been appropriate under these circumstances. Ours will be a meeting of disciples who want to work together. We are not opposed to what you are doing. I want you to know that. Moreover, as you know also, we are very happy to have one of the four of them come here as well to the expanding light, even though he and his wife have broken away from us, though perhaps less so he now, according to a recent letter. So part of what was going on is not every one of the four people agreed. And, one of the men was coming to the expanding light actually to lead a couple of programs that he was a specialist in. And the hope had been that his time there would perhaps inspire him to want to be more involved with Ananda. But his wife was even much stronger in the repudiation. She was a very strong force for the repudiation. So what can I say? Swami says, any positive energy you want to give us, we'll accept joyfully. Please, however, don't give us resentment and anger. It is unwarranted. We hold no negative feelings toward you. It's just so... And of course, everybody is friends. And all of these people, we'd all been friends for many years. It's very... There's just so many different ways that you can interpret things and get very confused. And if one says, I want to work with you on my terms, and then someone says, okay, then we won't expect you to work with you on our terms, and then you're mad because you were excluded. That's exactly what happened here. Please don't give us anger and resentment. There's no basis for it. We're fine with you doing what you want, but your actions have consequences. And I was part of that 1999 meeting, and I know if they had been there, that's a word that I don't really like to use. They really weren't in tune with what we were doing. They just weren't on the same wavelength. They weren't on a bad wavelength, they just weren't on the same wavelength. And everybody else in that meeting with Swami for 2 weeks, we were all in the same wavelength, and we were building a very powerful magnetism. It was not appropriate to include them, because they really were on a different wavelength. Not an evil wavelength, a very fine wavelength in many ways, but not the same one. And that was just a fact. I haven't been sending you, Swami had been making these videos in America that he'd been sending out these, basically because he'd left America and was in Italy, he was communicating with us through video. And I'm not sure whether they were communicating with the whole community or just with the leaders or maybe some of both. But Swami said, I haven't been sending you the videos I've made for America because I haven't felt you'd want to appreciate them. When you go to America this time, you might make a point of watching them and tell me whether they interest you. So it's just one more. I'm doing this to help everyone be in tune, but you've told me that you don't really want to do what I'm doing, so I'm not going to impose these on you. But if you decide you want them, I will be happy to send them to you. He really just sort of they push the envelope. And see, this is what's interesting about Swami. Let me just put this down too. He's very generous, he's very supportive, he expands the boundaries, but there is an edge. And when you cross the edge, it's different. I remember when I was first traveling to Seattle, and we were developing the group there, which eventually led to everything that's there now, but this was in the early 80s when it was just starting. And we had different leaders at different times. And this one leader started teaching the energization exercises differently. And I was there, and I had to say to him, I said, the road that we call Ananda is very, very broad, but it has edges. And when you start changing something as fundamental as the energization exercise, you have fallen off the edge. I have to either invite you back, you have to come back onto the road, the broad highway that is Ananda, or we can't let you continue to be Ananda. Either you have to step down from leadership or the group has to not be Ananda. And so Swamiji's acceptance of our need to understand and to explore and to figure things out, it was very, very broad. But there were subtle points where he would just draw the lines, which is what he did in this case. And I think they were shocked because people were accustomed to Swamiji being very broad-minded and very tolerant, and they themselves were not astute enough to realize what they were doing when they were repudiating his suggestions and insisting on their own intuition, and that his voice would be one of several, but not necessarily in any way more decisive than their own. It was just, fine. If you don't want me to be an instrument for Master to you, then I'll go away. So he did. My love and friendship are always with you both, Swami writes. So, and Ananda there fizzled out, basically. Two of the 4 people remained in Australia and have continued to serve God and serve Master. They've just basically created their own work, which seems to have been a very, a good work in the name of Master, but not in the name of Ananda. The other couple came back to America, and we're never not harmonious, but we're never involved in quite the same way. Never had a leadership position after that. And I don't think lived in the communities, but I'm not sure. So Swami says, my love and friendship are always with you both. So, now, I have a feeling I referred to this letter earlier, but it may have been in another program. I think I gave another program. Darn it, I'm getting a little confused, because I speak a lot, but in different forums, and so I'll have to give a backstory to this. And if I've already given it in this series, I apologize to you. This is to a devotee who wanted to have a dialogue with people trying to destroy Ananda. This is November 17th, 2001. This was to an individual who was a very dedicated member of Ananda and still is. This was a waffle, a disturbance in the force that happened that resulted in this letter. This came out of an experience in 2001, a group, the SRF, the lawsuit that Self-Realization Fellowship was exercising against Ananda that started in 1990, that had gone quiescent, but there was still an appeal on a copyright issue making its way through. The appeal resulted in certain issues being remanded back to the court for a jury trial, because the judge had decided the issues on the basis of what's known as summary judgment. And summary judgment is where the facts are not in dispute and the judge makes a decision on the basis of the law. The appeals court decided that the judge had made assumptions about certain evidence that he had no right to make, that it was in dispute, and that the plaintiff was entitled to present the evidence to a jury and let a jury of the peers make the decision. The judge felt the appeals court was absolutely wrong, and he was very annoyed about the case getting sent back. It was also a matter of copyright law, and the judge thought it was preposterous to expect a jury to make decisions on the basis of copyright law, which is very esoteric. You can't just do it on whether you like the way somebody talks. You have to know what the law is. But none of that mattered. We were still in for this jury trial. At that point, we had been under litigation for 11 years, and we were into it for about $11 or $12 million, and SRF had spent, we estimated, about $50 million at that point, and it was a secret from most of the SRF members. So we did some direct action, direct education. We went to the SRF convocation in August, and we did this huge thing where we informed thousands of SRF members that millions of their dollars had been spent suing us, and the majority of them had no idea. And in the course of doing that, we set up this room at the Biltmore Hotel where we had all these relics of Master. And we also sold a video of Master moving and talking at a time when you could not get anything like that at all. So people had to come to the room to get the video and various other things. It was very well done. And so in the course of this, one of the people who'd gone from Ananda who'd gone down with us met an ex-Ananda member who was a key person in all the attacks on Ananda, who had done, sent letters to people in the community. He'd facilitated the character assassination lawsuit on us. He was a bad hombre, so to speak. He was not a good man. He'd done some very hurtful things. But somehow in the spirit of the moment, the man to whom this letter is addressed got involved with this man and actually brought him up to our room at the Biltmore with his wife and brought him to me to make peace. Now, this man had been a friend of mine. He and I had actually been good friends many years prior. And now this man to whom the letter is addressed, thought we all ought to be big enough just to make peace. I did not think any of this through. I responded completely from instinct and later realized that my instincts were exactly right. I said, well, do you repudiate all that you did to try to hurt Ananda? You hurt many, many people. You've literally personally cost us millions and millions of dollars in litigation fees. Do you repudiate that? And he or his wife said, we regret that people were hurt. I said, that is not an answer. I want to know if you repudiated it, if you're willing to make reparations for the trouble that you've done. Otherwise, why would I welcome you? You've been nothing but a terrible trial. And if you haven't reformed, I would be foolish to invite you back. And so it went like that. And later I wrote the whole exchange to Swami, and he said that was exactly right. You can't. Somebody who's betrayed you in such a massive way and showed such a tremendous disregard for what you hold dear. I mean, and this man was trying to, really, literally trying to shame me into, like, you don't be so small-minded as to hold a grudge. We were still in the middle of the war. It's like, oh, here's a spy, invite him into your camp, have him come over for tea, show him all your secrets so he can take them back and use them against you. That wasn't being broad-minded, that was being stupid. You can see I had very strong feelings about this. So, but this man persisted afterwards and wanted to meet with these people who were still actively engaged in trying to pull us down, to have a dialogue. To a devotee who wanted to have a dialogue, Swami puts in quotes, with people trying to destroy Ananda. Swami writes, dear, this person, no one is going to tell you what to do. So Swami starts by saying, you're not under obedience to me. No one is going to tell you what to do. However, in matters like these, it isn't reason that rules. One thinks to reason things out carefully. Meanwhile, however, Maya takes control. Swami was extremely concerned about this man. I mean, he felt that if he persisted in following through and sort of trying to be the peaceful liaison, first of all, Swami felt, everyone else is working so hard to defeat what these people are supporting, and you're going over there trying to make peace with them. It's like, this is not the time for for an ambassador to go to make peace. They're just going to try to use you to take us down. And Swami felt, you might think that you have this sort of reasonable mission, but Swami says, meanwhile, Maya takes control. You sort of get into that atmosphere, you open yourself more and more because you have this idea in your mind that you're the big peacemaker, when your entire family is still at war, and you're going to go over and make peace with an enemy who shows no remorse about what they're doing. No one's going to tell you what to do. You can do what you want, but I'm warning you. You think you're acting reasonably, but Maya takes control. Swami says, please believe me. For I've seen this drama play itself out many, many times in my life. I myself might have left the path many years ago if I hadn't acted simply with love for God instead of trying to reason my way to clarity. See, this is also Swami's talking about this man. He's trying to think it all through. He's just like thinking about this point of view and thinking about that point of view. And Swami says, you're missing the point. You're just trying to use your mind to find the answer. It's not in your mind, it's in your heart. Master himself told me that's how things would have worked out. That's really something. If Swami had just stayed intellectual and tried to view the whole path just from an intellectual perspective instead of acting out of his love for Master. I mean, you don't exactly know where to think it. Master himself told me that's how it would have worked out. Our mind fools us. You know, when we try too hard just to say, well, we ought to be friends, we're all sort of on the same side, there's no reason to carry on this dispute. But it's the heart commitment to the family that had nurtured this man, and continues to, of course, because he got through this, has nurtured him, and Swami refers to this. I mean, your heart belongs here. Why are you over there? That's not where your heart is. You can reason all these ideas, but your heart is over here. And so then Swami says, the matter runs deeper than reason. Divine Mother won't allow those to stay at Ananda whose hearts are divided on such issues. See, it's also the actual issue of the whole litigation. You can't just sort of stand in the middle and say, oh, well, everybody has a little bit of the truth, when people are trying to destroy us. And that may sound melodramatic, but it wasn't. That's exactly what it is. I mean, that's what the judge himself said. Purpose of this lawsuit is to put Ananda out of business. And the judge says, and that bothers me, because it's one religious group trying to take away the religious rights of another, which is why when John Parsons wrote his book about it, he called it Fight for Religious Freedom. That's really what it was. And it was an ill-advised lawsuit, because in America, religious monopoly is illegal. So it was ill-advised because they were against the laws of the country. So Swami says, but if your Divine Mother won't allow people to stay at Ananda whose hearts are divided, you have to act where your heart is. You can't just sort of use your mind to see all sides of things. See, that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to see all sides of things. It's not a matter of reason. You can't do it that way. I say these things not to try to force you in any way, but because I love you. What saved me was the awareness that Master loved me and that I loved him. Clarity came later. I love you. Ask yourself this simple question. Do those people love you? Do they even care about you? They care only about themselves. Swami didn't finish this, but they're using you. They're not thinking of your welfare. They're using you. And we love you. You know, we've been your family for decades. We love you. Most important, ask yourself, do I want to be like them? In other words, again, get out of your head and actually look at this. Are these people attractive to me? Are these my people? You know, if I'm acting against or in contrary to what my whole spiritual family wants in order to support and sort of reach out and embrace this group, is that who I really want to be? Or is my family who I really want to be? This came up in other broadcasts that I was doing when I was talking about attunement. You know, we have to, who do I want to be with? Who do I want to become? Even if much of my spiritual family may hold different ideas than I do, it's not just a matter of reason. That's what Swami's trying to say. It's not just, well, this point of view seems a better point of view than that point of view. It's, who is my family? Who do I love? And this is where Swami said, I loved Master. I stayed with Master. He loved me. And then he says, clarity came later. I acted on where my heart was calling me, and then my mind caught up to it later. Swami's warning this man, don't do it in reverse. Don't try to reason it all out and pay no attention to where your love is. That's a grave mistake. Maya takes control. Asha wrote a plea to people to speak up on Ananda's and on my behalf. This is what was happening. We were still, I guess, I thought it was earlier than that, but maybe it wasn't. When there was a lot of controversy in the community and a tremendous number of critical mail was coming in. This was the man I spoke to earlier. We were just being flooded with these negative letters. And I wrote and I said, well, stand up for what we believe. Why are we just letting this flood in? And it produced a series of responses. Swami didn't entirely approve of my doing that. Wait a second, let me get that clear. No, Swami did approve of my doing that. But it was complicated. He was heartsick that I needed to do it. That's what it was. He felt that, why do people need to be reminded that they should stand up for Ananda and for him? That was the issue. It was like he was glad I did it, but it was very painful to him that I had to tell people that they needed to stand up. Well, what I understood, and this is how I understood it, is that people were confused because we've been trained to be harmonious. We've been trained to get along. We've been trained to accept. So it was hard for people to understand this is not the time to accept. This is the time to declare. And because I was in the middle of the litigation team, I was more conscious of the nature of the war than some of the people were who were farther on the periphery. That was how I saw it. I didn't feel that they didn't know. I felt that they were confused about what they should do. And I wanted to suggest that maybe this is what you should do. But again, Swami was sad about my letter, not for the letter itself, but for the need to do it. Asha wrote a plea to people to speak up on Ananda's and on my behalf. It was a good letter, and there have been many good responses to it. I am happy for those people's letters, above all, for what it signifies for them. The best thing for you right now is to take the time to write such a letter yourself. In other words, act on your love for this community. Don't just stand on the sides and think about it. Swami says, I've never liked the word proactive. It seems to me rather a non-word, but it fits in this case. Don't just think about these things, act. Believe me, I know what I'm saying. I know the signs. I know you. Don't just smile benignly and say, well, I'll think about it. You've given your life for many years to something very good. Good for you, good for many others, good for your own progress toward God. You stand in danger of throwing it all away. And for what? You very likely will say, you're taking it all too seriously. Am I? You'll see, if you don't take it at least as seriously yourself. With love and Master. And the extremely good news is he did. He just heard Swamiji. I don't think he was entirely clear, but he understood that Swami would never have written to him like that if it wasn't as a matter of life and death. He did not perceive it as a matter of life and death, but Swami did. So interestingly, this letter, this strong medicine, actually got exactly the result Swami was hoping for. So we've had a couple of others in here in which it didn't end so happily, but this one ended perfectly. So there's one more, and I think I'll be able to finish it tonight, and then we'll be done with the section. This was written in June 30th, 2001, and this is still the very last gasp of the litigation years. And there was just this disharmonious energy began to infect, I think it was the publications, the music and the publications. Just people were just not getting along with each other. And everybody felt quite justified. And there was also a certain amount of unfortunate behavior and unfortunate personalities playing against each other. So there was a lot of justification for the disharmony that was happening. But Swamiji saw it in a very different light. He saw it as just sort of an infection, an invasion of negative energy. that was really unrelated to the specifics, and he was very concerned about it. So he wrote in this way. He wrote to dear everyone in that department. And the summary of this is, be divine warriors. I'm writing now especially to ask all of you who are involved in the music and the publications, please don't allow yourselves to channel negative energies. It's, just as simple as that. Don't become a channel for negative energies. And, you don't think you're becoming a channel for negative energies. You think you're being righteous and you think you're sort of standing up for the right cause. But when he just puts it like that, don't be a channel for negative energies. Sometimes you have to stand back and ask, how did I get sucked into here? Because Satan uses our own false reasoning. I think I'm being right, but what is the result of my action? How do I feel inside myself? Am I beginning to criticize people that I have loved and worked with for years, lived with for years? Then Swami says, these tests aren't personal. In other words, I think they are part of an attempt to do harm on the part of conscious negative energies. So Swami's warning us that things are, there's a lot of negative energy swirling around. This was the Bertolucci lawsuit. I'm not the Bertolucci, but the end of the SRF lawsuit, the end of 12 years of this. They're negative energies that are trying to weaken us, and those conscious negative forces are tapping on the consciousness of anybody who they see where there might be a little bit of an opening, a little bit of vulnerability, a little susceptibility, a little, oh yeah, I've been mistreated too kind of energy. And then all of a sudden we're fighting with each other, conscious negative forces. Swami says, please do your extra best to be loving and harmonious toward one another, positive and loving. Just like this is not the time to be airing petty grievances. This is not the time to be picking each other apart for things that don't really matter. Do your best to be positive, loving, and harmonious. I know that's how you all feel in your hearts. Give extra emphasis to that divine feeling now. Radiate love and harmony. And don't blame yourselves nor anyone else for anything, no matter what the seeming reason. I've seen this happen. Unfortunately at Ananda, not that often, but waves of negativity come through. There was a period of time in this community when just sort of this negative energy got started. It hasn't happened to us very often. But there was just among a group of people that just this negative thought form took hold. And people just started criticizing us, criticizing each other. It's like, and if you're sort of not quite in it, you sort of see it like that. It comes in like everybody caught the same cold or the same flu. It's like people are not quite themselves. So one has to be very careful not to accidentally become a channel for negative energy. And these tests are not personal. This is Satan trying to see if he can break us away from each other. Swami didn't put it quite like that. Well, he did. It's a conscious negative force. This is not really about any of you. This is about whether we can stand together. So in order for us to stand together, we need to stand firmly and be very active. We need to radiate positive energy. Don't blame yourself or anyone else for anything that happens, no matter how reasonable it may seem, because there's a force. Swami used that phrase, and I tossed it in, but it's a beautiful one. He said, Satan tries to persuade us through our own false reasoning. So we don't feel like we're being influenced. We just feel that we suddenly have these great ideas and that we're suddenly understanding things. But if that understanding, especially at this time, leads us to feel divisive toward our own gurubhais, just know for a fact that you're being wrongly influenced and don't give in to it. The pains a few of you are undergoing are a passing thing. Love God and love God in one another. The energy you radiate outward to others will determine what you become in yourself. I think, among artists and musicians and writers, there's often a sort of angst. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today, which is actually, it's a very important point to speak of. And there was a conversation about, well, those of us who are sensitive, talking about the astrology, talking about the turmoil in our country, just talking about the weather, whatever it might be. And I was sharing something that was a very, very big shift in my consciousness of things. When you become attuned on the spiritual path, you actually do become very sensitive. You become very sensitive to other people's energies, you become sensitive to astrological forces, you become sensitive to thoughts, and often things that other people can just sort of just go right through without noticing, the sensitivity increases and you feel it. You feel people's unhappiness, you feel dissonant vibrations, and I am a very sensitive person. I used to be especially a very sensitive person. But I spent a long time, many years, thinking that my sensitivity was a spiritual quality. Now, understand, of course, it was because of my devotion to the spiritual path that I became more subtly aware of things. But I used that sensitivity as a sort of I'm so delicate. Oh, because I'm so sensitive, I can't do this, I can't do that, and I couldn't possibly go there. And one day, I just realized, Asha, if you're that spiritually sensitive, it should make you a warrior. You should be like a lion. Just the opposite of, I'm so spiritually sensitive, I have to always protect myself. It should be exactly the opposite. And it was just an attitude shift. My consciousness was just the same, but I was reveling in my sensitivity and celebrating my inability to tolerate so many things. And then I thought of real saints. I thought of let's see, Papa Ramdas, I believe is what he was called. He was a marvelous saintly man. Swamiji met him in America, I guess in the early 60s. He's passed from this world. He wrote several books, World is God, and he just walked out of his house one day chanting Ram, 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 Ram. And his books are about literally just walking all over India, just chanting Ram, 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 Ram. And the way he writes his books, it takes you a little while to sort of realize what happened, like the conductor bodily threw him off the moving train and he fell into a briar patch, and then he didn't have any food for a number of days, and then when he tried to get food, they then threw him out into the sewer. And it takes you time to realize that that's what he's describing, because he keeps just describing Ram, 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 Ram. He was totally unfazed by it. And whatever spiritual sensitivity I can claim, I think Ram Dass could claim a lot more. But he used it to transcend his sensitivity, not to reinforce it. And I mean, I don't know if that's relevant to everyone, but it was a huge and important understanding that I came to. And ever since then, yes, I'm just as sensitive as I've ever been. But when that sensitivity comes, instead of indulging it or protecting myself as I've always used to do, I try to gather my forces stronger to transcend it. I mean, all is Ram. Everything in this world is God. I'm a child of God. I should be able to move through this world untouched. I mean, God knows I'm not successful all the time, but my attitude toward it shifted. So what Swami is saying here, the pains a few of you are undergoing are a passing thing. So this is just this, yes, this is how I feel. Yes, my feelings have been hurt. Yes, I feel whatever I may feel. It's not that I say I don't feel this way. It's like, what is the proper response to this? It's a passing thing. So Swami's not saying that what you're experiencing is not true, or even not valid, or not worthy of you, none of that. But it's a passing thing. This may be who you are, but always go in the direction of transcendence. instead of in the direction of reinforcement of that which makes us weak in the face of the difficulties of life. That's why God sends us these tests. He sends us these tests to see if we can rise above them, not for us to use our suffering as an excuse to go down. So Swami says, negativity cannot win in the end. Be divine warriors. Work, however, in harmony and love, together in a spirit of love. This is the only way. Don't let personal difficulties block your broader vision. And that actually pretty much sums up exactly what I was saying about the sensitivity. Yes, I'm sensitive, but don't let the personal difficulty that creates for me blind me to the bigger picture in life. Beautiful advice. And I believe they did it. I think it was successful. So, with much love in Master, thus ends strong medicine. Next time we begin with yogic techniques. So thank you all very much. God bless you.